meeting is open to the public. Welcome to everybody who's joined us today. A couple of the small parts of the report, appendices 2 and 4 of the report, item 11, are not available to the public and press because they contain exempt information. I'll remind everybody of that when we come to that agenda item. The meeting is being webcast as per usual and will be recorded to watch through the council's website. We've got one public question which we'll hear later in a short moment. My note says, could I request that mobile phones are switched off? That's been done. There's no fire test planned for today, and I'll ask to introduce themselves if that's all right. I have not done that yet. My name is Tom Hunt. I'm the leader of the council and chair of the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee, and as always I'll start on my left.
Councillor Angela Argento, representing Broomhill and Sheffield and Sheffield Adult Health and Social Care Policy Committee.
Thanks. Douglas Johnson, Councillor City Ward, Chair of Housing.
Fran Belbin, Councillor for Firth Park Ward and Deputy Chair of the Council of the Committee.
Ben Miskell, I am Chair of Transport Regeneration and Climate as a Policy Committee, and also a Councillor for Park and Arbourthorne Ward.
Thank you, Councillor Dorndale, Councillor for Shire Green and Brightside and Chair of Education, Children and Families Policy Committee.
Good afternoon, Abdul Qayyum, Councillor for Firth Park and Chair of the Licensing Subcommittee.
Good afternoon, Ibiola, Councillor for Netherhead and Sharrow. I'm Deputy Chair of EDSC Committee and I'm a sub for Councillor Zahir Naz today.
Good afternoon, Councillor Curtis Crossthorne. I am a Ward Councillor for Bayton and the Chair of Communities, Parks and Leisure Committee.
Hi, I'm Martin Smith. I'm Councillor for Dore and Totley and also leader of the Lib Dem group on the council.
Good afternoon, Councillor Mike Leavery, member for West Ecclesfield and Deputy Chair of Finance, substituting for Councillor Otten.
Mohammed Maroof, Councillor for Graves Park Ward and Chair of Economic Development, Skills and Culture Policy Committee.
Good afternoon, my name's Diane Hurst. I'm a member for Richmond Ward, an elected member for Richmond Ward, and here in my capacity as leader of the Sheffield Community Councillors Group. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll ask the officers to introduce themselves as well, and if I can again start on my left. Thank you. I can come back to you.
Kate Josephs, Chief Executive.
David Hollis, General Counsel.
Jo Horrobin, Director of Integrated Commissioning, standing in for Greg Fell, Director of Public Health.
I'm Mike Jackson, Chief Operating Officer.
Amanda Clayton, Democratic Services.
Philip Gregory, Director of Finance, Commercial and Performance Services.
Joanne Ali, Executive Director of Neighbourhoods.
Meredith Teasdale, Strategic Director of Children.
Kate Martin, Exec Director, City Futures.
And Richard Groves, Director of Operations for Adult Care and Wellbeing on behalf of Matt Bosher.
Buddy. There'll also be a range of other colleagues joining at various points of the meeting to introduce reports. So just for confirmation for the minutes, we've had apologies received from Councillor Jo Otten and Councillor Zahira Naz, and Councillors Ulla and Levery are attending as substitutes. As I've mentioned, only a couple of appendices to the report, item 11, are exempt. The rest of the agenda does not contain exempt information. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Before I ask everybody if they have any interest in any of the items of business on the agenda, I'm just going to ask David to just say a note with regard to item 8.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, this is a matter which is a policy in relation to the transfer of, or potential transfer of community buildings. It's quite possible that members may have been involved in buildings within their ward or with groups who are interested in taking forward matters under this policy. Taking an interest in something isn't the same as having an interest in something. Having an interest is where it's about an impact on your personal circumstances or those of somebody close to you, or where you have been so involved in something that you have a bias that you cannot be seen to make an informed decision on it. I don't think that's likely to arise here, even if you've been involved with groups and taken an interest in buildings. Further, this actually isn't making decisions in relation to any actual buildings to be transferred. It's a policy decision, and decisions on actual buildings will be taken in the future.
Thank you very much for that clarification. With that in mind, are there any members who wish to declare an interest in any items of business on the agenda? Councillor Belvin.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we did say in the interest of transparency it might still be good if members did say it. So I would like to say that I am a trustee of an organisation that has an existing lease with the council over a property. Thanks.
Great, thank you, that's very helpful. Before we go on to the next agenda item, which are the minutes, I'm just going to sort of break from the agenda for a second, and I want to say something about some events in the city that have taken place over the last week. And colleagues, I spoke last month about our duty as councillors and as leaders to call out and oppose racism wherever and whenever it is found. And I'm angry that I'm about to say what I'm going to say. But over the last week, some city councillors have been subjected to vile, racist and Islamophobic hate, subjected to abuse because of their faith and skin colour, subjected to lies and mistruths from those whose sole aim is to sow division and hate. Utterly unacceptable, but sadly in the current climate, all too common, because what we are seeing is an emboldened racism, the return of the ugly racism of the 1970s online, in workplaces and on the streets. And I know lots of people share this concern. I know that people feel intimidated, people are tired of being on their guard, people are tired of having to justify themselves. And I'm not prepared to accept that this is just how it is now. I'm not prepared to let this racism become normalised and socially acceptable. And I know that that commitment is shared by everyone on this committee. We have to defeat it by calling it out, by naming it and opposing it head on. So let us be clear and continue to say with one voice, hate speech, racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, anti-migrant hate and bigotry of any form have no place in our city. People have the right to free speech. It is a cherished British value, but inciting hatred or violence is criminal. People have the right to democratic protest, but if you come to divide or incite fear, you are not welcome in our city, and we will oppose you, as many did on Saturday in the city centre. Online platforms have to take more responsibility for what is being said online. Publishers of local and national news have to take more responsibility for the comments on their accounts and think hard about whether their journalism is shared responsibly on social media. At this time, we must all support our friends, our neighbours and our colleagues and ensure that hate crime in any form is reported and responded to. As politicians, we have a responsibility too. Our words matter, but so do our actions, and we will act. This council will celebrate and support work to mark the 20th anniversary of Sheffield being the first city of sanctuary in the UK, a city of hope, not hate, a welcoming, inclusive, diverse city, a city of many faiths, many cultures, and many backgrounds, but one Sheffield, a city that we love. This city will work with our communities to develop this council will work with our communities to develop a programme of events citywide for 2026 that bring people together, that celebrate who we truly are, not a fictionalised account. This council will continue to call out racism and we will promote unity over division. We will reject racism and those who seek to divide us, and we will do it together. Thank you. I'm going to invite Councillor Smith and Councillor Argencio to also speak.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom. On behalf of the Lib Dem group on the council, I want to express our anger and sorrow at what's happening. This racism that's been shared on social media and in public is simply vitriolic hate speech, and we cannot accept it in any form in Sheffield. It's the responsibility of everyone on this council to take a stand against divisiveness that's poisoning political debate across the country and our city. We are all proud to serve the diverse communities of Sheffield, and we've all got a passion for making Sheffield the best place it can possibly be. And we know that the hate that's been spewing online and in public does not reflect the vast majority of Sheffielders. Sheffield is a great place to live, to grow up, to bring up a family, and we want to keep it that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Agencio.
Thanks, Chair. My group and I are appalled by the horrific and Islamophobic online attacks on colleagues in the Labour group, but and our fellow councillors that happen to be Muslim. We, as a city, stand up to racism always, because racism just doesn't fit the kind of city that we are. We are a diverse, resilient and kind place. And this was demonstrated on Saturday. I was one of the circa 1,000 people that stood up to racists from outside of our city coming here to incite hate. And we as Sheffielders, whatever our place of origin might be, we will always stand against racism. It is enraging and frustrating and upsetting that the far right, through unresponsible social media and, including local papers, to be honest with their headlines, seeking to divide us with false information. I think that people need to take responsibility. I agree with the leader, with the chair, that we, social media platforms need to take responsibility, and journalists need to take responsibility, particularly with the comments part on their newspapers online. But I also suggest that people take responsibility with checking their sources. And not believe everything that they see online, because we do have a responsibility also not to believe everything that is out there. And I think sometimes it's just easy to just read the title and not read the article, but please take also responsibility and be a cognizant citizen of this beautiful city.
Thank you very much. I'm going to invite the Chief Executive to also say a few words.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, colleagues. It's not particularly usual for me to make a statement, but I feel compelled to do so today. So as Chief Exec, I have the absolute privilege of speaking not just for the organisation, but for the thousands of people who make it work, our staff, our teams, our colleagues who serve Sheffield every single day. The leader and Councillor Smith and Councillor Argencio have spoken powerfully for our city and our council, but I just want to speak for a minute for the organisation that serves it. Ours is, and has been for many decades, a diverse, dedicated and deeply human workforce. People who turn up in all weathers, in all circumstances, to make Sheffield a fairer, safer and better place. And right now, many of our colleagues are feeling this strain. There is pride in what we do and who we serve. Every bin collected, every call answered, every child safeguarded, every street cleaned, every community supported matters, and these services are the fabric of civic life, and they are delivered by people who care. But public service is not easy, and we need to be honest about the climate we are currently working in. As we've heard, some of our councillors, elected members of this city, and our own inspirational Lord Mayor, who holds a role as first citizen in the city, which I think stands above all of this, have and continue to face horrific racial abuse online. This is unacceptable, and it has no place in Sheffield or anywhere else. Some of our staff too have faced anger and abuse while simply doing their jobs. So to those colleagues and to all who support them, you have our thanks, you have our respect, and you have our solidarity. Our values as an organisation are clear and they guide our response when we face division or hate. We will not be intimidated. We will not turn away from our responsibilities. I'm really proud to speak for the entire senior leadership team of this organisation when I commit that we will continue to stand for a city that is kind, compassionate, courageous and inclusive. And we will continue to play our part in building a Sheffield that lives up to its best traditions, a city of sanctuary, a city of fairness and a city of hope. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. I think, as I said, we have a duty in our positions to be clear about what's going on, to call it out, to oppose it, to name it, and then to act. And so I really welcome the words that we've heard today, so thank you. Right, let's move on to item 4 on our agenda, minutes of the previous meeting, which took place on the 15th of October 2025. Are people happy to approve those minutes as a correct record? Okay, thank you very much. Item number 5 is public petitions, questions and statements. We've received one question today, and that's from Julie Pern. And Julie, if you'd like to come up and ask your question, please. It's the right-hand side. There we go. Thank you.
Is that correct? Yes, so I'm here as the Secretary of Sheffield Nablus Twinning Association. And I'd first like to say that we are pleased and proud that Sheffield last year with Nablus signed a declaration of friendship, and we do look forward to that declaration being extended today. I do also, though, need to say that we feel some disappointment that the city isn't making a more profound commitment to the city of Nablus, particularly under the appalling situation that our friends find themselves in, to move towards a full twinning. I just have another couple of comments that I would like to make. With regard to the report, the officers who compiled it did talk about sometimes not having full knowledge. And I would just like to say that Sheffield Nablus Twinning Association are always available to point them in the direction of objectively verifiable information. I also wish to say that the report suggests that the situation is often too complex and controversial. And indeed, it may appear that way if the situation for Nablus is seen in terms, as it is often in the media, as a conflict of equal parties, equally motivated by ethnic and religious nationalism. And finally, I would like to say, before I give my question, the purpose of twinning is to get beyond stereotypes and know real people. So my question is, twinning was not intended to be merely a transactional and monetized corporate relationship. It was conceived to create links celebrating diversity and respect for our common humanity. It is disappointing to read in the report before the committee that twinning, this is one of the reasons, is not recommended because, quote, the populations and general outlook of both cities are markedly different. The Equalities Impact Assessment identifies race, faith and sexual orientation as characteristics which pose problems developing ties with Nablus. This flies in the face of the reality of the ancient city of Nablus, home to the 3 Abrahamic faiths, which actually provides for us in Sheffield a model of religious and cultural harmony. Like the UK, Palestine's people can equally be blue-eyed and fair or black. Palestinian flags are prominent in pride marches in Sheffield as LGBTQ visitors are made welcome in Nablus. Dundee has 45 years' experience of twinning with Nablus, once seen as controversial and problematic, now a normal and positive aspect of the city's identity. Will this committee invite a representative of Dundee City Council to share their experience, including benefits to social cohesion? Will the committee speak to LGBTQ citizens of Sheffield who have visited and been welcomed in Nablus? Thank you.
Julie, thanks for your question and for the work of the Nablus Association to help us to deepen our friendship with Nablus. Look, we are continuing our friendship. We're proposing today to continue our friendship agreement with Nablus so that we can deepen that friendship, something that I know we are all in full support of. Continuing to befriend the city of Nablus is a positive and meaningful thing to do, and it's in line with our partner city policy, which I'll come to. And crucially, the proposals today are supported by our friends in Nablus. Given that context, it wouldn't be necessary and not really necessarily appropriate for the committee to undertake the actions that you've proposed. But let me come on to say a bit more, because I want to point out that the assertion you made that twinning was not recommended for a particular reason is not correct. We're very proud, I'm very proud of the friendship agreement that we have established with Nablus in light of the, frankly, unimaginable suffering and heartache that the people in Palestine have faced in recent years. I'm proud that we, Sheffield, have been able to express our solidarity and friendship with the people of Nablus publicly in this way. Since the signing of the friendship agreement in October last year, there has been, as you'll be aware, regular dialogue between the City Council and Nablus, and we're supportive of the community links that have been established, and your organisation has been part of that. And we've had visitors to this very building from Nablus, and I'm sure we will do so again. So I want to take this opportunity to thank you for your contribution, for the work that your group has undertaken to extend that hand of friendship and to establish connections with the community in Nablus. Look, twinning shouldn't be a transactional or monetised relationship, and that's not how we see it. The key principles that guide our international relations work are set out in the partner city policy, and these principles exist to ensure that we manage our relationships with a real focus, but that we bring a rationale to those international linkages, one that focuses on mutual benefits between Sheffield and our partners. And developing links or partnerships can support with objectives around culture, sports, heritage, but also links to economic development. And when we undertake an assessment to the most appropriate partnership arrangement, factors that are considered include the location, strategic fit, profile, connections, resources, purpose, a whole range of factors. And it's really important to stress that the proposal today to extend our friendship agreement with Nablus is supported by our friends in Nablus. So we look forward to continuing this friendship, to have the opportunity to raise awareness of these activities with you, and to welcoming friends to the city before too long again. So thank you for your work, and we will come to this agenda item later on and have further discussion. I hope you'll be able to stay for that part of the meeting. Thank you. Item 6, member questions, none today. Item 7 is the work programme, and we've got Amanda Clayton who's going to just highlight a few key bits from the work programme for us.
Thank you, Chair. There are 5 new items to report listed on page 23, and a note that there is a full agenda for the December meeting of the committee. With regards to the local government boundary review, there is an intention to establish a member working group which will start meeting in the next week or so. One of the other new items relates to the referral from Counsel on the 1st of October regarding Sheffield Poverty Truth Commission. Details are set out in section 2, page 21, and a joint report will be submitted from officers across public health, cost of living and customer experience and strategy. That's it.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions, any comments, any feedback on the work programme that members want to raise? I don't think so, in which case I'm going to ask members if they're happy to approve the work programme recommendations that are set out on page 20. Great, thank you very much. Item number 8, community buildings and community asset transfer. We're joined by a number of colleagues here today. And when they have taken their seats, I will ask them to introduce themselves. And this begins on page 33 in the packs, if you have that Great, thanks very much for joining us today. If you could briefly introduce yourselves, please, and then introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Tom Smith, Director of Customer Experience and Communities.
I'm Diane Owens. I'm doing some work at the moment on community buildings and community asset transfer.
Peter Bartle, Service Manager from Property Team.
So thank you, Chair. I'll briefly introduce the report and then I'll pass on to colleagues to get into a little bit of detail on the policy itself. So firstly, just to say, obviously, this follows up a report we brought to this committee in March 2024, where we agreed that we would develop a new community buildings policy, and in particular, we'd work with a number of community organisations and with elected members, particularly in the south of the city, to do that. And this provides an update in terms of that policy, brings it forward for recommendation, and also provides a bit of an update on some of the other associated work with that report as well. Worth just noting, as David said right at the start, that this is a report that doesn't make any decisions about any individual buildings today. This is a policy decision about how we will ultimately make decisions about individual buildings. In that regard, we won't be able to discuss any individual buildings or cases in member questions today either, because there will be no doubt commercial confidentiality issues in that space as well. So just again, just to be clear on that, the policy itself is a culmination of around about 15 months of work, where we've been working with community leaders to understand their experiences and knowledge in developing, supporting and managing community spaces. We're really clear in the message that we've heard coming out of organisations that community asset transfer and community buildings are clearly partly about land and buildings, but are mainly actually about our people and our communities and the infrastructure that is there to support our people in our communities. We know it's really important to therefore continue to use the council's asset base to support really vibrant, healthy and connected communities going forward. But at the same time, we do need to be honest as an organisation that given the challenging financial context that we're in and we've experienced, lots and lots of our assets have lacked the investment they need. Some are nearing the point of being beyond economic viability in reality. So we do need to be very clear that, you know, we can do the work to make sure if we are handing buildings over, we're handing them over in a good condition and we're not handing liabilities to our community organisations as well. Community asset transfer is just not new to the city. We've been doing it for a long time. We're really fortunate to have an amazing third sector in the city with loads of experience in this. Around half of the buildings in the city that we view as community buildings are actually already managed by third sector organisations, and a small number are in community ownership already. So lots and lots of experience there. And lots of benefit to community asset transfer if we do it in the right way as well. It helps us in terms of getting really good social infrastructure, helps us to reduce costs, helps us to support community empowerment, but also for those organisations who take on the buildings, it genuinely can unlock other funding that we don't have and actually bring about better buildings in local communities if we're willing to let go and transfer them across in the right way. Clearly done badly, though, that can exacerbate some of those challenges, which is why we wanted a really good policy in place that allows it to be done in the right way. So very, very briefly, there were a number of pieces of work that took place to get to this policy, not least the South Local Area Committee pilot, where we worked to establish a working group and look at some live casework in that area in particular. We had 9 local third sector organisations involved in that work and 6 elected members. And they met over a 10-month period to look at best practice, learning from other authorities, other organisations, and to look at some of those live requests. That has resulted in us helping to be able to bring forward some really innovative work actually in some places, and not least the work that's taking place in Heeley with the Primary Care Trust and the mental health pilot in that area, which has been directly supported by some of that work. We've still got a number of live cases in place, as you will note from the report previously, and it's probably worth saying right up front that this policy, if agreed today, will allow us to bring forward a number of those live cases for some decisions to the appropriate committee as well and help us to move those forwards. The last thing probably, second to last thing probably just to note before I hand over to Diane is just to say that we have also reviewed a number of HRA funded buildings as part and parcel of this work. And I'm not going to get into the individual ones, but there are a number of decisions that will come forward in due course around some of those as well, as part and parcel of this. And the last thing to say is we are also working on an associated piece of work around the charging policy for buildings, which will be brought forward in an appropriate time and in line with the budget process. And that is predicated on a new booking system, which again will help us to increase the use of community buildings, which have identified as a major factor which is affecting the financial viability of a lot of these spaces within local places. So with that, I will hand over to Diane, who's just maybe talk us a bit more detail around some of the lessons learned through the pilot development and some of the specific changes to the policy, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, just to kind of echo what Tom said, really, this piece of work does reflect some extensive engagement with third sector organisations. I think we've spoken to over 100 organisations and individuals now over the last 15 months, and that wealth of expertise in the city has been invaluable. So we just really want to recognise the, the expertise that we have in the city around from the third sector in terms of community assets and management of those spaces. The report then brings together like our combined learning, which reflects the housing revenue account work and the work through the South Black pilot, and we also have a board and a steering group that's kind of supported this work as well. So it's like a reflection of combined learning. Some of those key areas of learning have been around kind of condition and demand. So as Tom has kind of highlighted, we recognise that that our buildings and that our assets have lacked the investment we'd ideally like to have made. But despite sort of quite a sort of challenging context, I think from us and from the third sector, who also face the challenging context in terms of securing capital investment that that is needed for buildings, there is still significant demand for conversations about community asset transfer. There's we have a very vibrant and active third sector, and so there's a lot of demand to talk to us about asset transfer and opportunities and growth areas as well, like social enterprising. Where organisations want to have these conversations. Support and partnership's been a real key thing as well in terms of the sector that they want to work jointly with us, that we want to move forward in partnership and on this work. And in building this community and social infrastructure, and they want that to be done in a way that is supportive and recognises the role and the challenges that they can be taking on with taking on assets, and that we do that in a way that that provides that kind of support and partnership approach. Also, our learning has been around that kind of need to be, fair and consistent, kind of going forward, and that's inherently kind of built into the policy to ensure we have a really fair and consistent approach to how we deal with asset transfer going forward. And localised and sustainable were two of the other key messages that kind of came through. The need to make really, localised decisions around asset transfer, understanding the neighbourhood, talking to local ward members, talking to local organisations, understanding the local community and the other infrastructure that's in place. So we're making informed and localised decisions. And also, taking on board sustainability, we had strong feedback around the need to support organisations in terms of income generation and income diversification, and us being flexible in our approach around lease agreements and terms so that we can enable that sustainability. So overall, we're trying to, I guess, through the policy, balance an approach that's about being transparent and progressive whilst also managing the inherent risks around asset transfer. So just to kind of briefly touch on some of the kind of key changes in our policy, which, kind of changes again in terms of our, kind of current interim policy at the moment. We've gone with a very broad definition of a community asset to give kind of greater clarity and greater flexibility. So we frame that around any space that's currently being used or could be used for community activity. So we're not really explicitly excluding any asset from a, potential conversation about asset transfer, but that's obviously subject to the council's needs, in terms of our operational, financial, strategic needs. We've given greater clarity, I think, in terms of the types of lease agreements that are available, in terms of the durations and the terms that are available. We've moved towards more of a subsidy band approach in terms of rents, so rather than just a kind of default of peppercorn rents, having a subsidy band approach which enables us to allow for up to 100% discount, but flexibility there to apply some level of charging if that's, appropriate and an organisation can afford that. How the assets would be identified and communicated is I think there's greater clarity given around that and our approach to how we will communicate assets that might be available and how organisations can approach us. We want to really support informed decision making again, and this is about understanding and being honest about the condition of buildings. So the policy does outline what we will do to support organisations and communities to make informed decisions. We will share information like stock condition surveys, running costs, information like that to help inform decision making. We also want to have an approach that supports the income diversification and income generation. So the policy gives increased flexibility around short-term letting space and also allows for ancillary commercial letting. That's been a really strong piece of learning through the piece of work, is that where we look at successful examples of asset transfer in the city, there's often a commercial element to the income streams of those organisations. So it's been a real strong message that we need to be more open and supportive of that, recognising there's significant costs associated with managing an asset. A clear and more transparent approach to our charging and fees, which will mirror the banding approach for the charging, for the rent. So we want to be more, more open and transparent about our fees and surveyor fees, and also about our approach to review. Like I say, there was a strong message around being supportive, and so we want to move to a review approach, which is much more about providing that support, recognising the work of those organisations and those volunteers, and having a supportive approach to how we kind of make sure that, that the asset transfer is successful and sustainable. So yeah, that's sort of some of the key kind of changes in the policy.
Great, thank you. That's really thorough and comprehensive, and thank you for the work over the last 15 or so months to get us to this point. I'll open it up to members to ask any questions, provide any feedback on this. Councillor Maroof has indicated, and then I'll come to Councillor Crossthorne, Ulla, Belbin, so there's a few.
And thank you, Chair, for that, and in welcoming this report, because I think a lot of work has gone into it, so thank you for that, and the time that we spent together in terms of past learning on this. These are just very friendly questions, and some of them are actually observations. I mean, the first one I'll start with is around buildings themselves. We all know that sometimes the buildings become the subject of actually people's focus. And in the most simplistic way, what are we doing to say, look, this building might not be suitable for you? We really need to look at other alternatives, because many a time in this council we've gone through that route where the building has become the subject, and really the building is not suitable for the work that they want to carry out from there, the services that they want to carry out from there. So that's number one. Number two is, obviously, there are other land and property owners in the city, apart from the private sector. That includes the statutory bodies. Have we made any connections with those? Because clearly the NHS have buildings, the police service, the ambulance service, all these people. Sort of more of a look at a one-state sort of idea about using all the estates that we've got in the city. So that's another question. And around the rent, yeah, this has always been something that's been quite contentious, because we are using section 123, we always have to put a rent on it. And I'm glad to see that on page 72, you're actually using a subsidy now, which is band A, band B, band C. The question there is, again, a simple question there, which is who actually makes these decisions as to where it falls, because it's very subjective. Even putting a value on it is subjective, but this becomes even far more subjective than that. So that would be something that we need probably a little bit more clarity on. And I've got other questions, but I'll stop on the questions around the lease, if I may. From reading there is a strict user clause, I believe, that people will be using for a specific purpose, because otherwise we'll be contravening section 123. And secondly, in terms of the repair liabilities, there's two questions there. One is around, would you have a photographic evidence appended to the lease to make sure that there is a certain amount of work carried out for the amount of rent-free period that we're actually giving people, or would it be something that people come back to us? And the second question on that one is, are we aware of what our outstanding repairs costs on a lot of these buildings are? And I did say that was going to be final question, but my very, very final question...
Please make sure it is.
Very, very final question here, Chair, is around the many times that I've come across, and I'm not going to use any examples of any specific community groups here, is that we always ask for a business plan. And sometimes communities are in a position to provide a business plan. Most times they're not. And again, it becomes a very subjective exercise, submitting it to the officers when they've not got the knowledge of actually putting a business plan together. Is there any help for them to help them out in that process, if it exists in this new policy? Thank you, Chair.
Much. Okay. If colleagues could be as brief as they possibly can be. That would be helpful. Councillor Crosthorne, please.
Thank you. I thought it was Mike that was subbing for Joe, not you. Sorry. First of all, Chair, I just want to echo your comments at the start of the meeting and the comments by Councillor Smith and Argenzio. We can disagree on policy, but racism isn't a policy, it's hate speech, and it has no place here or anywhere. So just wanted to place that on record. On this report, I am fully supportive of this. It's something that I think I've been asking for quite a while, because there's an example just next to my ward with Burley Spa Bath House, which is a Grade 2 listed bath house from the 1840s. It does need lots of serious work that ultimately the council cannot commit to, but there is a group of extremely dedicated people within the Preservation Trust who have been working for years on this, and I know that they are very eager to push this forward. If only the council moves out the way, and that's what I see this report as doing, this process as doing. It's helping us as an authority move out the way of community groups who want to help themselves. So instead of saying no to community groups, we can actually turn around and say how. And I think that's a really important change that we need to make. My only plea, though, is that this isn't just a process for leasing buildings. It does come with a cultural shift within the council. So we do work with people to help make it a success. And it was really reassuring, actually, in the opening comments to hear about community infrastructure and unlocking external funding and things, because that's what we really need here. It isn't just about leasing buildings, it is about the community infrastructure. So that's my only plea with this. Other than that, I'm really supportive.
Thank you. Councillor Uller, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Diane. Great to see you again. And thank you, Tom, for your update. I really welcome this update, and I'm pleased that you've carried out the pilot in South Lac. You talked about how this policy is fair and consistent. Can you tell me about how we will ensure that the community asset transfer policy process is open and equitable across Sheffield's diverse communities and wards? And are there any measures in place to support groups from disadvantaged backgrounds? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to come back to colleagues now, because I've got three more questions, so we'll do a second round. I'm conscious there was quite a lot in that first round, so if people want to come back on those points, that would be helpful, and then we'll go for three more.
I'll try to share these out amongst colleagues in an appropriate way. So there's probably some general stuff that's probably worth me saying up front in terms of the way in which we'll take some of this forward from a resource perspective. So we are currently looking at the resource, and we are currently looking at what that will mean for us as an authority. And we are very importantly looking at where we feel this work actually should land within the council. As I said in my opening remarks, we've kind of acknowledged that clearly this is some stuff about technical building stuff and lease arrangements and property, but there is a big community element to this. And our view at the moment is we need a very strong community focus across the policy and the application of it as we go forward. So my expectation is wherever we land the resource, it will clearly be somewhere between the community's function and the property function, so that we get that balance right in terms of supporting communities and making the right decisions around our property assets. So worth making that general point, I think. Peter, I don't know whether there's some technical things around the policy that I know Councillor Maroof was raising earlier. I don't know whether you want to address some of those. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you. I'll try and cover them off, Councillor Maroof. In terms of building suitability, yeah, we're taking a data-based approach so that we are compiling the appropriate data for the associated buildings. We're sharing that with community groups, that they fully understand the potential liabilities and challenges that those buildings may or may not have, and helping that inform them in terms of a potential business plan, which is also one of your other questions. So yes, there is an anticipation that they would have a business plan. That business plan will be related to the size and the complexity of the challenge, and a relationship to the length of the lease, for example. So it's all done in stages compared to the challenge at hand, but there would be support in helping them bring forward something that is going to have the right balance for the complexity of the project and is supported in a way that's going to bring forward the proper benefits for both the organisation and the council, to be honest, as well, so that the aim is for it to be a win-win scenario from that point of view. In terms of working with other owners across the public sector, I think it's fair to say that we intend to do some more work, and that will be some work that we would do following up this review, to work with other owners, and not just public sector owners, but there are other community organisations that we could point in the right direction to support those and backfill any spaces or vacancies that might arise for groups to be able to use a community space. So that might cover that one off. And then the final one from a technical point of view, I think, is the outstanding repair costs. Again, that will be related to the condition survey. So that will be part of the condition survey to give full and accurate information as to the extent of that liability that I mentioned earlier.
Thanks, Peter. It's probably also worth just saying that there has been some work taking place specifically in Sheffield. We were part of a pilot on one public estate, so we've done a huge amount of work in actually mapping across a number of the statutory public organisations, our building assets, not necessarily just for community buildings work, but actually for the broader piece of work we're doing around assets and our sharing and co-location of space. So that piece of work is a really good foundation that is going to enable us to take some good wider decisions than just community buildings going forward in terms of how we use our estate in a more efficient way. Probably worth just picking up on the point, I guess, around cultural shift and around how we kind of move some of this forward. There is clearly a change process that underlies some of this policy work, and as I said earlier, because we're going to be driving a lot of the reason I'm sat here really is because we're driving this from a community perspective. You know, we are really keen to make sure this just doesn't become just a property thing, that actually we're driving the community benefit stuff through. And in terms of things like the subsidy of rent, it's probably worth saying again that one of the things we're really clear is that historically we simply haven't had the transparency as authority as to how we're making a lot of the decisions around who we do and don't subsidise, and a lot of the point of this policy is about transparency of the decision making, as you've said, Councillor Maroof, and making sure we're very clear that when we make a decision to allow somebody subsidised rent, we do that in the full knowledge of a business case being in place, and that is a sustainable process. And the governance around this is mainly through Finance and Performance Committee, actually, in terms of most building decisions. That's where most of these decisions will ultimately be made. And then a really good point from Councillor Crosthorne, I think probably the last thing to say around Burley Spa Bathhouse, which is probably an example I can briefly talk about because there's not really much commercial confidential in that. What this policy allows us to do is actually just enable funding from other places, like I said earlier, and Burley Spa Bathhouse is a great example. Listed building, really difficult, heritage building, important building for the city, but really difficult one for the council to create a business case to invest in it. So the way we deal with that is actually by letting go and letting someone else invest in it and protect it for the city in the right way, and this is what the policy should enable us to do going forward.
Great, thank you very much. Right. Councillor Belbin, Councillor Agencio and Councillor Hurst have indicated, so I'm going to take those three and then we'll probably need to draw a line there, given the business we have on our agenda.
Thank you, and again, really welcome the policy, and I think especially the way that we have arrived at the policy, which I think is, again, really demonstrating, as we did through the community strategy work, that actually working in partnership with our communities on these kinds of policies makes them much more impactful and makes them work a lot better. I mentioned at the top of the meeting that I'd been through this process to some extent because I'm involved with an organisation that did work with the council actually to take on a long lease. Back in the 2010s was when we were doing this, but we were fortunate enough that the council did have an officer who supported us with that process, and I think that has borne fruit in just the ways that you say. Sorry, I'm talking about Pittsmore Adventure Playground, so I'll just be clear on it. But that, you know, by taking on that lease, the playground has been able to draw lots of extra funding into the city to deliver really great outcomes. And to be honest, most of those are not about maintaining a building. And I also really welcome the emphasis in here that is around this is about people, this is about communities. It's not always about bricks and mortar. Taking on a building isn't always the best way, frankly, to deliver a service. You can easily get diverted into looking after a building instead of delivering what you actually want to deliver. So that's, I think it's really important that we recognise that, and I think that speaks to some of the points that Councillor Mohammed raised as well. The question I wanted to ask around this was around what next, really, in terms of how we apply the policy. I'm sure several of us here get reasonably regular communications from individuals sort of saying, I'm really interested in this building or that building. I think it's great that we've got a kind of policy about looking at how we are much more consistent around rents, etc. But how do you see this going forward now if there's an organisation that does want to come forward and take on the building? Do they just say there's a policy, let's get in touch? What happens next? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Agencio, please.
Yes, thank you so much. I mean, it's really good to see kind of having been involved in some of the early conversations, not just 15 months ago, but over the years, it's really good to get to a point where we can finally have some kind of clarity, transparency and consistency on how organisations can, you know, think about asset transfer. Because although we've had it in the past, it's been kind of piecemeal and ad hoc, I believe, and that's, you know, what we were trying to get away from, and really good that it's been in full kind of cooperation and co-production with community organisations that have that kind of lived experience. I think people become really emotive about buildings, especially, I suppose, you know, coming from a completely different culture, because especially in winter and because the weather is so inclement sometimes here, you can't really meet outside, so the building becomes the focus of, can be the focus of a community, and some communities don't have big spaces, so that community building becomes where you know that you can have a party, a celebration, whatever needs doing, you know, a meeting, etc. I was just wondering, so I really welcome this, and I'm really pleased, you know, that is very thorough and looks at all the implications and all the angles. I was just wondering, in terms of ensuring equality of access to this in terms of smaller organisations, because we are talking about opening up the possibilities of funding coming from other places in terms of, you know, restoring some of the buildings that we can keep ourselves, but they are perfectly okay for communities to take on. Is how to ensure that those organisations that might be smaller in terms of, you know, like manpower, how they can have the same access to the process as organisations that might be larger in terms, you know, they might have paid staff rather than volunteers, because it is like there could be a disparity there in terms of which organisations are able to go through the process because they have the resources, and other organisations that might have the ideas and the resources in going forward, but not necessarily to go through the process. So how can we support? Do we put community groups in touch with each other? Do we have test drives of, you know, what to do, so that smaller organisations, as in staff small organisations, have the same opportunities as larger organisations? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hurst, please.
Thank you. Thank you for this. I think my question is terribly similar to the one that Franz just asked, but with a slightly different twist, because we know this is a long-awaited policy for that transparency and support dealing with community organisations, and as a way of enabling them to grow and develop sustainability within their community. And we know that community organisations are very responsive to the needs and demand within their communities, and part of that is reflected in the way that they move quickly when they see opportunities that will support them. So this policy is in development. it will be embedded. Processes will be developed that drop down from it that enable us to treat everyone fairly. But what happens in the interim? Over the last few weeks, several organisations and several individuals have got in touch with me that say, we have this issue. Will we continue to negotiate and deal with people who wish to lease or take over our buildings in line with the principles that we are going to accept, even though they may not be agreed as yet, in that we recognise that they're the best practice. So that's number one, what happens in the interim. And the second one is what happens when this has been embedded. Will we review the agreements that we have with organisations that currently exist? Because I'm aware that there are some across the city that are not necessarily fair and would look probably different had they been negotiated under the terms of this policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Maroof, you've caught my eye with the universal symbol for I have a very small point. So would you like to demonstrate you have a very small point to come back in?
Thank you so much for that, Chair. It's a very, very small point, and I'll keep it very brief. It's, I think, just picking up on what you've just said, I think you've really just asked the question. It's about existing leases, where community groups have got existing leases stretching to 99 125s and 25-year leases, and quite a lot of them have got issues starting to develop around how they maintain their buildings. And I'm asking this question from the point of view, as us being the owners of these buildings, how well are these community groups keeping these buildings? Because I know there are instances where people are coming back to us and saying we need substantial investment in these properties, which obviously touches upon what you've just said as well. But it's keeping our stock in good condition is also a key point here as well. And thank you so much for that, Chair.
Colleagues, do you want to pick up those contributions for members? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I've just realised in the course of those questions that I don't think we addressed Councillor Uller's question either about equitable access to the process, which is very similar to the question that Councillor Argenti, I think, was bringing up as well. So we'll seek to address that. I think just on the point around, I guess what the policy is doing and what it's not doing, I suppose, I think some of the questions, what Councillor Maroof has just said, and to some degree what Councillor is describing in terms of the future review of existing leases and things, is this policy kind of gives us the first step in a process, and probably a longer term process that we're going to need to go through across the city in this space. And ultimately we will need to work our way through and regularise lots and lots of arrangements across the city in a supportive way and in line with this policy. But that will be determined by the level of resources that we've got to put into this programme of work as we go forward, and we're doing the work on that at the moment. It probably is worth saying in terms of the very much, what happens in the interim space is that we are open to having conversations with community organisations right now, and to be fair to the team, we are having those conversations right now with a number of organisations and trying to tactically support some people who are, I'm not sure the best way of putting it really, in almost like crisis with buildings, because we want to still support community organisations even in the interim. So that offer is still there. And I think you'll remember when we came last year with the report, we had a list of 20 odd stuck buildings, and once this policy is agreed, they will be the ones of our first focus in reality, because they're the ones who've been sitting for quite some time for us to try to resolve them. And there's a number of buildings on the list that we'll bring forward hopefully reasonably quickly. I don't know whether you have any reflections down in terms of the learner or anything in terms of the equity of access point and how we support organisations regardless of size on this to work their way through the process.
Yeah, so we've obviously tried to be really inclusive in terms of the organisations we spoke to and engaged with, and the caseload of that we have in terms of asset transfer requests reflects diverse organisations in the city. So I do feel like we've got kind of diverse voices reflected in the learning and then the approach going forward. And we've worked very closely with Voluntary Action Sheffield as well, because through the Shared Prosperity Fund, they have been able to tap some of our organisations into business planning and financial planning advice and support, and that's been really, really crucial. So, but we know going forward there's considerations around, that business planning and financial support, and we need to kind of, be mindful of that. Such a wealth of expertise and knowledge in the city as well. We've had quite a lot of conversations. I've had conversations about peer-to-peer support. And actually, I think, there's a lot of goodwill from organisations in the city, capacity allowing to do that. But I think that's something we need to reflect on again as well from a resource perspective, because that has resource implications for those larger organisations. But I think the will is there, and the expertise are clearly there to be able to do that. So it's something we've kind of started to talk about. We've been talking about through the project around that kind of peer-to-peer and how smaller groups and organisations are supported. But yes, we still need to obviously, in terms of the thinking around resources, think that through a bit more.
Great, thank you very much. I think it's been a really helpful discussion and sets up what the next phase of work will be. So there are a number of recommendations before us today, colleagues, on page 35 in the pack, that this committee is recommended to approve the proposed Sheffield City Council Community Asset Transfer Policy, to note the update on the charging policy and approach for sessional use of council-managed community buildings, and to note the progress made for the review of the 22 HRA supported community buildings. Are colleagues happy to support those recommendations? Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us today and for answering colleagues' questions. We now then move to item 9 on our agenda, which is supporting people via Citizens Advice Sheffield. And we're joined for this item by Sam Martin. Sam, for the benefit of people in the room and watching online, could you just briefly introduce yourself and then the report, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Afternoon, committee. I don't have a name card today, I'm afraid. So my colleague and trusted sidekick, Emma Dickinson, can't make it today. So I'm sorry about that. You've got me instead. I'm the Assistant Director of Integrated Commissioning in the Integrated Commissioning and Public Health bit of the Council, with particular lead on vulnerable adults, communities and voluntary sector. The paper that we've got on your agenda for today, committee, is around funding for the Citizens Advice Service. So as you'll all know, as a council, we do lots of work across the whole council to respond to concerns in the city around poverty and the increased cost of living. And that's been a subject that's been mentioned at full council on a number of occasions recently. And in the council, we've got a long-standing, successful strategic partnership with Citizens Advice Sheffield, who provide really valued benefits and financial advice and debt advice to people across the whole of the city. Much of that is funded through our core grant aid programme, which the committee did a renewed approval of, a 10-year approach to grant aid. I think it was in 2023, if not 2022. The partnership with Citizens Advice is really good value for the city and for us as a council, because our resources then sit alongside additional resources that Citizens Advice bring into the city through other funding arrangements. So that means that collectively we can support many more households than we could if we were working separately. There's a real link to that kind of approach to the work that we're talking about with the community building policy that you just heard around added value from work with colleagues in the voluntary sector. So the paper that you've got on the agenda today proposed as a continuation and renewal of some additional funding that we've been granting to Citizens Advice through a number of different service areas alongside the core grant, which supports specific work with particular groups. Some of those have been in place for a number of years and they're due to come to an end, so this is the formal process of renewing those. We're bringing these to the committee under a single paper, and that's part of our kind of renewed approach to being more strategically coordinated across directorates, so that our commissioning of our work with Citizens Advice is much more joined up, so we're not coming with separate agreements with different officers and different directors. So just in brief, and it's all in the paper, the elements of the proposal are £300,000 from the public health grant, which would support additional core activity. This committee approved a similar additional amount from the public health grant back in 2022. So this renewed allocation would enable continuation of that additional capacity up to 2028. Then there's £98,000, which is from the housing revenue account, which would be per year for 3 years up to 2028. And that is to provide additional debt support specifically for council housing tenants. That's really helpful for us in terms of enabling people to pay their rent and not getting into arrears. And finally, there's £110,000 from the general fund in adult social care every year for the next 3 years up to 2028, and that is to provide for some work around financial health checks, specifically for people who receive support through adult social care. And that's very helpful because some people obviously need to pay for their care, and having a good financial health check often can enable us to get in the payments that we might need to support some of the work that we're doing. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Sam, thanks for joining us. Thanks for that overview. Really helpful summary of what's before us. I've seen a couple of members. I've got 3 so far. Councillors Levery, Argentio, Johnson and Smith. So 4, 5. Okay, I'm going to take the first 3 then. Councillor Levery, Argentio and Johnson.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the paper. It's a really good piece of work here. I've just got 3 clarification questions, if you can help me with, please. In the recommendations, in terms of provision of the service, you talk about acceptable delivery and compliance with grant terms. Can you tell us what you're using to assess delivery in terms of performance and the grant terms, please? That's one question. The second one was on page 99. You list all the face-to-face provision that's in place, and I think you're adding Stocksbridge to the list. Are you intending to outreach beyond these sites? Because there are a number of highly deprived areas that have no face-to-face provision in terms of CAB. I'm thinking in particular of estates that are among the 10% most deprived. Angram Bank, Thorncliffe come to mind. And thirdly, in the HRA funding, it mentions the underspend in the MFIT budget. So is that underspend actually going into the pot in terms of provision, and does an ongoing underspend make up the 98,000 per year, or is it actually coming out of somewhere else in the HRI budget? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Argentio, please.
Thanks, Sam, for the report. I just have a couple of queries regarding obviously, Citizen Advice do a fantastic job. It's particularly pleasing to see where all the, in-person kind of points are. I was just wondering, what is the interaction between these services, the 3, areas, and other services that we have that are in-house? So, for example, the cost of living team, the work that council tax team do in terms of hardship in that area, and also how does it interact with the the South Lac pilot in terms of in-person advice over there? Are there any plans to have those interactions? Are they already planned? Are we going to weave them in? Etc. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson, please.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, it's very welcome to see more money going into advice services, because they can be a real game changer for a lot of people. As it says here, living standards are not getting any better. So that's good. I just want to ask about a 3-year thing. So it's good for voluntary sector organisations to have that security over 3 years. But of course, it's not index linked, so it implies it's a real terms cut each year. Is that the case? Is that intentional? Is that just the way that the figures work out? And of course, it's for the service to deal with those. And then just on the face-to-face, I wanted to ask where we're getting to with, I think there were discussions underway about increasing the amount of face-to-face advice, because telephone advice is okay for people who can use it, but you always need a mix of those. And with the face-to-face remote access points, I think our feedback from those is that although people have been able to have access to speak to an advisor remotely at those places, they still often need someone there at the host organisation to help them interpret what the advisor has said to them and translate that into what they actually said and what the next steps are. So I wonder if you can fill me in on any of that, Sam.
Thanks. Sam, I'll come back to you. I've got 4 more members. Just for the record, I've got Councillors Smith, Uller, Dale and Belbin. Is there anyone else who wants to come in? Nope, I'm going to draw a line there then. So we'll go for a second round. Sam, we'll come back to you first though.
Okay, thank you. So I'll try and go through those in order. So the first few questions from Councillor Lavery about the grant terms and conditions. Acceptable delivery, I guess in terms of a grant, means some very broad standards around payment regulations, etc. So it's probably best for me to get back to you with more detail about exactly what we mean by the term, because I haven't got the grant terms and conditions all in front of me. So, but I'm probably best to give you a more thorough answer in writing, if that's okay, just because I don't have it all in my head. In terms of face-to-face provision, there's an ongoing, and there's a number of questions about that, so maybe I could answer those in one go. There's an ongoing dialogue that we have both within the council with members, council members, and locally, and in our regular grant sessions meetings with Citizens Advice about the need for face-to-face work and striking the right balance on that between the amount of resources that we've got and how that spreads out. And obviously it's much easier and quicker. You can see more people if you do telephone and online work than you can face-to-face. So getting the balance around that is really difficult to achieve. But we do really press Citizens Advice on trying to make sure that they're in the right places, doing the right thing in the right way. I think we're probably all going to have to accept that that's never going to be perfect. But where that people do identify, and in your local area committee areas, where you identify areas that might benefit from face-to-face work, please do get in touch with us, because we can work with Citizens Advice to try and find access points that they can reach into to deliver from. So in the report, there's already a big list of community access points where you're able to access Citizens Advice, which is really good. It's not everywhere across the city, but they can try and move around where people can identify where there might be some gaps. Councillor Lavery, I'll come back to you on the HRA underspend question, because that's not my budget area, and I know it's one of the advantages of doing this as a collective piece is that we've got everybody's proposals in one. However, it just means I don't know enough about the HRA aspect of it to be able to answer you, so I'll take that one away and come back to you if that's okay. On the interaction, Councillor Regencia, between Citizens Advice and other services, there is a lot of joint working. So Citizens Advice come to and are part of the council's cost of living steering group. So they contribute to those strategic developments and are part of the discussions about how different partners can work together. I guess what Citizens Advice offer and provide is a unique, qualified, trained, regulated advice offer, which in many cases the council doesn't offer that ourselves. So they're a really positive added value benefit to some of the other services that we provide. For example, the advice we give to housing tenants is really, really useful, and it's regulated, because Citizens Advice are obviously a regulated organisation in terms of providing that legal and financial advice. I'll just, I've lost your questions because the computer's turned itself off. Let's get that back. On Councillor Johnson's question about the grant amount, so like most of the grants that we give out, these are not linked to inflation, so they don't go up year on year. We hate doing that, I guess, if I'm perfectly honest. We wouldn't like to do it that way if we could help it, but at the moment that's the way that we do it, and we do work with our providers really carefully over the years to try and then contain those as their costs inevitably go up like ours do, but the funding that's available doesn't. Over time, I mean, we've come back for additional funding for Citizens Advice. For example, the public health allocation in partly will help them manage some of those inflationary pressures, and we try and do what we can when we get the opportunity to. But unfortunately, at the moment, they're not linked to go up every year. I think the final one that I haven't covered there, Chair, would be the question about the South LAC panel, and I'm afraid I just don't know the detail on the South LAC panel provision, so maybe I could take that one away as well and answer that one, Councillor Regencia, if that's okay.
Great, thank you. So Councillor Smith, followed by Ulla, Dale and Belvin. If people could be relatively brief in their comments, and then we can get to the recommendations.
I'll be very brief, Chair. The information I was looking for has already been provided in that last answer, so I'll pass.
Exemplary, thank you. Councillor Ulla.
Thank you, Chair. Sam, my question is also in relation to face-to-face provisions. I'm really happy to see there are face-to-face provisions, because that's something that residents in Netherhead and Sharrow often raise with me, seeing that there aren't enough of these Citizen Advice face-to-face opportunity for them to go and get advice from, particularly those who are digitally excluded. And there are awfully a lot of people out there who feel digitally excluded. I'm not going to ask the same thing as Councillor Johnson, but my question will be, what strategy will Citizen Advice Sheffield or we will use strategy to reach those people who are digitally excluded? So if we use more digital means to reach to people who are digitally excluded, that's not going to work. And those people out there will need this support. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dale.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Sam. Thank you for bringing this. I understand, first of all, I'd like to thank Citizens Advice Service and all of the other voluntary and community sector organisations that are currently dealing with people who've got really complex needs, and the cases that I understand frontline workers and volunteers are picking up through voluntary action, Citizens Advice Service, are becoming more and more complex, so it is more difficult. But one question I do have, and it is about capacity, I understand that, and there are issues around digital exclusion, but where there are the facilities within voluntary and community sector organisations and libraries for people to access the Citizens Advice Service remotely via a screen, within this grant, is there anything in there to help those other voluntary sector organisations who are hosting those facilities? Because my understanding is actually there are staff from within other organisations who are then having to support people when they come in to access that service by scanning documents or helping with emotional needs of individuals that are coming in, because quite often people can be, as we will all know, really, by the time they've got to the Citizens Advice Bureau service, sorry, so it's changed its name, they've already got to a point where they're really quite upset. So is there anything in there which will help build capacity for those organisations to host those services? Thank you.
And then finally, Councillor Belwin, please.
Thank you. I also wanted to just put on record our thanks to Citizens Advice Sheffield. I attended their conference recently and first of all was stunned by the number of people in the room, and that was their staff and volunteers, and of course a huge proportion of their service is provided by volunteers, and I think that's an amazing service that we are getting from them. And it was really pleasing to see how many people were in the room. And I've also sat in some of the meetings where it's been our services alongside CAS, where we're seeing some of that partnership working in action. And it's really positive to see how the services are working together. The question I wanted to raise was just around, through the work I've done with the Sheffield Poverty Truth Network, one of the issues that has kept coming up is around this issue of people having to repeat themselves over and over again when they're going to different services and asking for advice. And I'm aware that there has been some kind of pilot work done around data sharing between Citizens Advice and the Council. And I just wondered if you could say something about that or give us a bit of an update on that pilot. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Back to you, Sam.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of the first question from Councillor Uller about kind of, I guess, communicating and getting the word out. So Citizens Advice, they do a lot of work through the various networks and community partners to advertise the fact that they're there. It's not all on through sort of digital channels, I guess. But like any communications and awareness campaign, anything that can be done additionally to get the word out there. So I'm just thinking off the top of my head, if there's anything that we could put out via your local area committee networks. I mean, it doesn't hurt to repeat this stuff regularly, does it? So that the people that didn't hear it the first time round get it when they need it. So more than happy to take that away as an action. We can make sure that some information comes around for councillors and local area committees to promote in their area. The question from Councillor Dale about supporting the organisations that are sort of hosting some of the Citizens Advice delivery is a really good one. So the funding that we're talking about here is specifically going to Citizens Advice. How far any of that, in terms of either rental agreements or payments to host organisations, I don't know off the top of my head, but you've raised a really good thought in my head, which is to go back to and ask how some of that stuff works. Conscious that we've got this network of really good voluntary sector organisations, and we want to make sure that they're all supporting each other, and there isn't too much of a burden taken on by one organisation in hosting another one, if you see what I mean. So it's a really good question, so I'll take that one away, and we'll raise it with Citizens Advice at our next grant meeting to see what we can do about that. And I guess the final question was from Councillor Belvin, wasn't it, about that sort of data sharing. I don't know where we've got to with that one, I'm afraid, Fran. So again, that's probably another one. I'm doing quite a bit of that today, Chair. I'm sorry about that, taking things away and providing a bit more of a written answer when I've got a bit more information about that one. Thank you.
Sam, really helpful. appreciate you stepped in today, but if you want to get back to individual members, and I think it'd be helpful if those perhaps the collated responses could then be shared with the whole committee just for everyone's awareness. That'd be really helpful. But thank you very much for answering those questions, and also for committing to take away some of the really helpful points and suggestions that people have made, which I think are really helpful contributions from members, so thank you. Colleagues, recommendations are on page 97 in the pack. Sam has outlined most of the content of them in the relevant grants that are being set out today, and so are people happy to support that package of recommendations? Great. Sam, thanks very much. Right, item number 10 is the 12-month progress update about the Nablus Friendship Agreement, which we've touched on already in today's meeting. This report, colleagues, begins on page 119 in your pack, and we're joined by Nick Hamilton, who will introduce this report. Nick, thanks very much for joining us. If you could please briefly introduce yourself and then introduce the report, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Nick Hamilton, I'm the Council's International Lead. The report you have before you today is a review of the progress in respect of the friendship agreement that Sheffield City Council signed with the municipality of Nablus. The initial document was signed the 29th of October 2024, and that provided for a review after 12 months, which either party could actually say they wanted to continue in that relationship, or it could be a case of, well, actually, it's fine, we're going to walk away with our heads high. It had that flexibility. You will see in the paper that there's some highlights in terms of the main activity that's taken place within that period. And we're also very grateful to the Sheffield Nablus Association here in Sheffield and other organisations out in Nablus that have actually develop that relationship. I think it's worth saying with any of these relationships, whether they are partnerships, twinning, sister city relationships, a lot of it comes down to the community groups as well, because in terms of the relationships, that's at a grassroots level, and also just in terms of basic finances and resources. We've had regular dialogue with our counterparts in Nablus, and you will see we focused on a small number of projects in terms of trying to actually affect knowledge exchange, and Nablus being able to actually benefit from Sheffield City Council's expertise and also the SIMCA's expertise as well. For a number of factors, not least the climate for one of them in terms of mass tree planting. Some of the activities that they were wanting to take place just haven't been able to happen, and they will be reviewed going forward. The arrangement was actually assessed against the criteria within the partner city policy that this committee approved in November 2023. And based on that criteria, the recommendation is to actually continue the friendship agreement for a further period. This we've obviously had dialogue with Nablus municipality, and they're happy for that to continue. The suggestion is that rather than it just being a 12-month extension, we extend it for a further 24 months because in terms of resourcing and also in terms of the situation on the ground, things perhaps haven't established as much as they could have done in that period, and it would seem futile just to bring it back in further 12 months. So let's give it that extra period. So as I said, the recommendation is to extend for a period of 24 months, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Nick, thanks very much indeed. Councillor Argentia.
Thank you, Nick, for the report. As you already know, I have, we've discussed this in pre-agenda meeting and in pre-meeting. I have some kind of issues with some of the wording in the impact assessment. I think it is great that we are doing the 2 years rather than 1 year. It's great that we are in contact with Nablus, and despite the difficulties that they are having because of the situation that they're finding themselves in, we have managed to do some work with them, and we've had them visiting a couple of times, and it was great to meet some of the representative in person. I think when we do the impact assessment, we have to be very careful about not making assumptions about people. The way I read some of the stuff on page 134 is that any Jew is not supportive of Palestine and its right to self-determination, and that is not true, because we have people in Sheffield who are of the Jewish faith, and they support Palestine, especially with what is happening in Gaza. Also, the assumption about LGBTQ plus people and how they would be seen in Nablus. I think we have to be more careful about what we say. I just happened to be in Dundee this summer, and I went to the Victoria and Albert Museum because it's free, and with my children, and there was an exhibition on Palestine textile and their history, and I just want to read this. I took some pictures, but there was something about the twinning, and it says Nablus and Dundee. Since 27 November 1980, Dundee has been twinned with Nablus, a city in Palestine. Twinning is a formal agreement between cities to establish collaborative links and networks and foster friendship and understanding. In 1980, twinning with Nablus was considered by many to be a radical act. Despite some opposition at the time and in the years since, Dundee became the first city in the UK to be twinned with a city in Palestine. For the last years, the Palestine flag has been displayed in the city chamber in Dundee, even during periods when the flag was outlawed within Palestine. So I think sometimes we need to be brave and courageous, and it's not just doing what looks good on paper, but also what symbolically means a lot to people, even if we don't do very much, just by putting a flag up or, extending that hand of friendship. That is still very important. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a range of comments there. I know the members want to comment. I think just on the equality impact assessment point that you raised, of course we need to recognise that there's not homogeneity in groups, and there does need careful drafting on that. So I think, point is well made. Councillor Uller, I had seen indicate, and then Councillor Miskell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Nick. First of all, I really welcome the extension of our friendship with Nablus. I've been fortunate to meet some of the guest visitors to our Sheffield from Nablus. But I hope the process to be twinned with Nablus is accelerated. I think there is a lot of good, both cities share a lot of common causes, as Julie mentioned early on. My question is in relation to the security situation in Nablus. What channels of communication can the city use to raise awareness and thereby reduce impunity of settlers carrying out acts of wanton violence? Thank you.
Councillor Miskell, please.
Thank you very much, Leader. I certainly respect Councillor Argentia's point, but I think it's also important to recognise the lived experience of many LGBT people in the Middle East, and I think it's important that we note that, whilst also acknowledging our unwavering support for the Palestinian people. Now, I'm really pleased with this report today. I think actually it's exactly the right thing to do to extend the friendship agreement that we've got with Nablus for that 24 months. Now, I think a little bit about a number of years ago, I think it was in 2019, where this council recognised Palestine for the first time, and I think sat over there, we had the Palestinian ambassador here. And that was a really proud moment for this council. And it's also echoed, isn't it, nationally, with a government now that has acknowledged and recognised Palestine as an independent state, and it's exactly the right thing to do. I think about my experience. I have not had the fortune to go to Nablus, but I have been to both Ramallah and Al-Khalil, or as many people know it as Hebron. And I exchanged letters and messages and videos from the kids that I have taught in Sheffield with young people in Al-Khalil. And it is entirely that sort of thing that we want to see more of, exchanging friendship across this city with people in Palestine and building those links. So I think this is entirely the right thing to do. And I'd be really keen to know what more activities we might well see in this 24-month period.
Thank you very much. And then Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. It's more of a brief statement than a question, because some of the questions I wanted to ask have been raised. But I agree completely with Councillor Miskell there. I mean, let's be honest, we've all seen the horrible things that have been going on, and we just want them to stop. I'll just leave it at that. It can't go on. We have previously agreed a policy around when we think a friendship agreement is appropriate or when we think a full twinning agreement is appropriate. And you've articulated those very well in section 2.8. So given that, and given the reasons you've just described there, Nick, I mean, I fully support this, basically, is the short version. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Nick, so a range of comments, and some of which, you know, feel free to, we can have further political conversations about, but on the specifics, it'd be helpful to get your thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Argentio, I can only apologise if some of the wording could be, you know, construed in a particular way. Obviously, we wrote the EIA with qualities and legal colleagues, and just my sincere apologies if it's come across in that way. Wasn't intended to. Fully appreciate, you know, the Jewish population are not a homogenous unit, and there are supporters of the Palestinian cause, and even I believe there are some members in the Sheffield Nablus Association here in the city as well, so apologies on that score. Councillor Uller, it's a difficult one in terms of raising awareness, certainly of the security situation. I think in the main, it's probably a case of actually trying to encourage our community groups to actually have a greater interaction with the communities there on the ground in Palestine, so that they get a better understanding of what it's like themselves in terms of the lived experience there. I can't think of any other way that we could actually do it. I suppose it's a difficult one to be able to articulate it.
Maybe, Councillor Uller, if I could, we'll come back to this in a minute, if that's all right. You carry on, Nick, and then...
Yeah, thank you. And I think in terms of, Councillor Miskell, you were talking about the opportunities for the next 24 months. What we're trying to do is actually engage with our contacts in the municipality to work out what their challenging issues are, and whether it's a case of that we have expertise in a particular area that we could actually share with them. We're also trying to broaden the participation, as I said earlier, in the sense of it's not just the council, it's got to be community groups, it's got to be members of the population here. For instance, one of the things through links with the Sheffield Nablus Association, we've actually effected some links with Learn Sheffield, and the hope is that we can actually get some of our young people to actually engage with each other and have some shared learning and, you know, just shared experiences with them. I do think we've got to be very mindful, though, in the sense of that we've got to be able to manage expectations, because if we end up with a lengthy shopping list, we're not going to be able to service that. We have 25 to 30 partner cities, whether that's sisters, twins, friends, etc., etc. And we've got to be realistic in the sense of the international team is me at the moment, and a limited budget. And it's bringing in colleagues from the wider council, members and also officers in terms of what their expertise is. So, for instance, I'm not an expert on hard waste recycling, but I know somebody who is in the council, and I've brought them in to actually engage and share that knowledge. Likewise, Simca, in terms of the Mayor's million tree planting scheme, they've got experience on the ground, so we bring those contacts in when we can. Thanks.
I think, Councillor Uller, just sort of pick up your point. It's incumbent on all of us, kind of in the platform, to use the platforms we have as politicians and through our groups and through formal opportunities to raise awareness and seek for those further opportunities to highlight some of the issues you're talking about. But do you want to just come back briefly on anything that Nick said in response to your question.
Point that, you know, when we are friends, it's usually the friends raise awareness on behalf of friends, particularly when they are in the difficulties. And in my view, that we should use our communication channel to raise some of the issues, but I accept there could be different opinion. Thank you.
Thanks. Right, okay. There are a number of recommendations that are in the pack today that we acknowledge the 12th-month anniversary of the friendship agreement with Nablus and the relationship that's been established with Nablus municipality. We agree that a friendship agreement continues to be the most appropriate form of partnership agreement between Sheffield and Nablus, agree to renew the existing friendship agreement for a further 2-year period to take us through to October 2027, and we acknowledge the strength of solidarity towards Palestine expressed in some parts of the Sheffield community and the links that have been established with Nablus through a range of organisations, including Sheffield Nablus Twinning Association and Powerfest. Are colleagues happy to support those recommendations? Great. Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you. Right, then on to the final item on our agenda today, which is item 11, the issuance of a local climate bond. I will just remind people that appendices 2 and 4 contain exempt information. So if any members do wish to touch upon any of the information contained in those appendices, please can you signal at the beginning of your contribution, because we will need to go into closed session. In fact, I might just ask now, is there anything in those documents people want to raise? Okay, let's carry on then and do it in open session, which is always best in these situations. So we're joined by Matt and Mark. Could you please introduce yourselves for the benefit of everyone in the room and watching online, and then introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Mark Whitworth. I'm the Service Manager for the Sustainability and Climate Change team.
I'm Matt Hutton, a Sustainability Programme Officer.
So the report that we're presenting today sets out a proposal to launch the Council's first local climate bond next month, titled Sheffield Climate Investment. The proposal is responding to Council resolutions from last year, which includes a full Council motion in February 2024, requesting Strategy and Resources Policy Committee consider the practicalities of issuing green bonds to raise extra funding to support climate action. In accordance with this request, we presented a report last December to the committee that included an evaluation of funding and borrowing options, and which sought an approval for officers to develop a local climate bond issuance proposal and seek full approval from the committee to launch a Sheffield climate bond in 2025. If the committee are minded to approve today's report and its recommendations, the Sheffield climate investment will launch on the 1st of December. We'll seek to raise £1 million and will be open to investors on the Abundance platform. And the City will join 16 other local authorities who've issued local climate bonds and have raised over £18 million to date. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Matthew, who's now going to talk through this in a little more detail.
Thank you, Mark. Today we're seeking the committee's agreement to 3 key decisions. First, to launch the local climate bond, now entitled Sheffield Community Investment. Second, to implement the Green Finance Framework. And third, to agree in principle to 5 future issuances, subject to a number of parameters detailed in the paper. Sheffield Community Investment provides residents with the opportunity to invest directly in climate-related projects. These investments offer a low-risk, stable financial return similar to other fixed-rate savings, but the money invested helping to support local climate projects. They provide local authorities with access to borrowing comparable to PWLB, but the true value lies in the way they engage and empower our community, enabling local people to play an active role in Sheffield's transition to net zero. The Green Finance Framework can be found in Appendix 3, sets out the types of projects that can be funded through this investment. These include renewable energy projects, energy efficiency, clean transport and climate adaptation. This framework also ensures transparency and accountability in how the funds are used. Comprehensive due diligence has been carried out, including a full legal and financial review of the abundance process and associated documents. The Commission legal report from Bevan Britton is shown in Appendix 4. A financial model has been developed which combines the investment from the Sheffield Community Investment with borrowing from PWLB. This allows the project cost to be distributed over a longer period, allowing for the revenue generated from the projects to repay the investment. An example of this model is shown in Appendix 2. Governance of the Sheffield Community Investment Project will follow a robust process. Potential projects that support our corporate plan, city goals and decarbonisation route maps will be considered by the Climate Oversight Board. Proposed projects will then receive political oversight through the Transport Regeneration and Climate Committee briefings before progressing through the Capital Gateway process. One potential project currently being explored under this framework is the Solar on Schools programme. Feasibility work has been completed on our maintained schools, and the findings show that the project is viable, delivering energy savings for the schools and generating revenue to repay the Sheffield community investment. This proposal remains in development. In summary, this initiative represents an important step to enable local investment in Sheffield's climate ambitions while maintaining financial prudency and transparency. Thank you, Chair. We're now happy to take any questions.
Thank you both very much for setting that out. I think it's really important, as you say, and a really exciting development for the City Council. If we take these actions today, I've seen 3 members who would like to speak. I've got 4. I feel like an auctioneer sometimes. Councillor Miskell, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Agencio, and Councillor Smith. So we'll do first 3. Councillor Miskell first, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thanks also to Matt as well. I know, Matt, that you've been leading on this particular project. You've only been with us for a number of months now, and you're already making a real impact. And have got absolutely amazing socks on as well, I could say. But I'm really, really pleased that we're bringing this today. I think it was about a year ago, wasn't it, that we all sat in this room and we set forward on this mission to create a climate bond, and we can see that 12 months after it, actually we are about set to launch it, and that's a really, really good success story. It's a success story for this administration jointly, across all parties and partners within the administration. But I think also it sets out something that's really important about how we are going to achieve our climate goals across the city. It gives citizens, residents of the city, an opportunity to buy into a shared vision of how we take climate action across the city. We know through things like the energy hub that have been launched in our city that people are ready and waiting and really, really do want to get part of making interventions that improve our city, that decarbonise our city. And projects like this will allow them to buy into that. And Matt mentioned in the report particularly about the Solar for Schools initiative. You know, what a wonderful initiative that is to make sure that schools can cut their energy bills, that they can decarbonise, but also that then they can spend more money on textbooks and teaching assistants as well. So this is the sort of project that is quite rightly mentioned in the report as a possible investment opportunity for the climate bonds. I guess what I'm really interested in is how this brings the whole city together. It gives people an opportunity to buy into this shared vision. And I guess as part of that, those people who invest are going to have to be kept up to date with their investment, not just at the initial point of investment, but also in the intervening years afterwards to see what success it's actually achieved. So, for example, if we were to look at that potential in schools and solar PV on schools to help reduce energy bills and decarbonise in schools, how will we keep those people updated, but also the wider residents right across Sheffield?
Thank you very much. Councillor Johnson, please.
Thanks, yeah. Like Councillor Miskell, I really welcome this coming forward. I'm going to say not before time, because although Councillor Miskell's described how a lot of work's been done in the last 12 months to get to this point, and I genuinely appreciate the work that's gone in there and see what's in the appendices. Of course, that motion itself was signifying 5 years since we, as a council, declared a climate emergency. And for a long time, we've all been saying, we should put solar panels on school roofs. It looks like a no-brainer. And if you look at what householders do who've got access to some resources, put solar panels on houses because it just makes sense financially, even if you're not bothered about the climate. But of course, you know, this council is, you know, same with businesses, that if they've got roofs, they see them as an asset, and they put solar panels on, it's a way to generate power to reduce consumption and bring a return. So this is really, really welcome, and I'm glad we're finally getting there. But I think, yeah, the really important thing is the climate goal isn't just about reducing energy consumption and increasing generation. It is about improving awareness of it amongst the public, and this is a real opportunity. So I'd be interested to hear more about the marketing of this and how it be set out to show that actually this is a real sort of opportunity for people to put their money where their mouths are, but also actually just to show how citizen power can transform into electrical power.
Thank you very much. Councillor Agencia, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for the report. I just wanted to put in the public record like a huge thank you to Matt and Mark, who have answered questions and done extra briefings and extra calls with me and a colleague. They've been incredibly patient, and thank you for all the work that's gone on here. I think it's fantastic that we got to this point fairly quickly from, last year. And considering how much work has gone into this, but I think it also goes further, and it's about, we often talk strategically how we can harness wealth that is already in the city for the city itself, and this is just an example of how there are lots of people that are really concerned about the environment and the impact that it's having on our city, and this is an opportunity for them to invest their wealth and get something good for themselves and for the city itself.
Great, thanks very much. So we've had a number of sort of questions and comments. I'm going to take two more, if that's all right, and just round out, and then come back to Matt and Mark. We've got Councillor Smith and then Councillor Maroof.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks very much for the presentation. So climate bonds have been supported by Lib Dems, or in fact proposed by Lib Dems and other councils. So in principle, I think this is a good idea, but there's just a couple of points you could clarify for me. You describe this approach as low risk, and whenever I see an investment proposal with attached the words low risk, I always think, hang about. So what would happen if any of the projects that are supported by these bonds don't deliver the predicted environmental benefits? And what would happen in the unfortunate situation where Abundance Investment Limited, so the main contractor or any of their subcontractors, folded? What liabilities are there for the council? So, for example, would we be obliged to repay the investors? Would we be obliged to continue to pay the financial return? I'm just worried about our risk, but also the potential for deterring potential investment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Maroof, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think Martin has picked up on some of the questions that I was going to ask. It was more around the city's exposure. And in welcoming this, by the way, totally welcoming this, it's just slightly playing the devil's advocate here, is what is the city's exposure to paying dividends if certain things are not in place, as Martin has explained. Secondly, in terms of the partner that we're working with, I'm assuming we went through a procurement process and they have a good track record. And thirdly, what if the public aren't as enthusiastic as we are today? That was simple.
Thank you. Right, so a set of questions and comments. Just before we answer them, in responding to the final two questions from Councillor Smith and Maroof, is it the case that you might need to refer to anything in Appendix 2 and 4?
No, I don't think so.
Fine. Okay, just wanted to check before we carry on. I'll hand back to you then. Thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you, Chair. So just taking those questions in order. So picking up Councillor Miskell's point around the success story and how we want to share this with the city. We are working with comms colleagues to develop a comprehensive and inclusive campaign of communications around the launch of this, and we'll be using networks that we have across the city in terms of education, working with community energy networks, and all the other avenues that we have. We circulate a newsletter that goes out to over 5,000 individuals and organisations So that will be, again, sort of putting out the message. But in terms of some of the comms that's already started, so the wheels have already started in terms of a press release being issued when the committee papers were made public, setting out the intention to issue the Sheffield Community Investment. And then following on from that, the intention will be that there'll be further communication through social media channels. And again, sort of in the lead up to the launch itself, a countdown campaign is planned, using multiple communications channels, obviously through all the council's social media channels, but also working with other organisations in terms of building interest and encouraging participation. So I think in terms of actually getting the message out, that's obviously the first and very major, important part of this. I think in response to how we keep people updated, one of the things that we have committed to doing is that all investors will receive a report. There'll be an annual report that will set out progress across each of the projects. And that also provides us with an opportunity to use that as an additional communications channel to promote other activity that's happening within the organisation. For example, there may be grants that are available for people in fuel poverty. So again, it's an opportunity to use that as a channel to put out additional messages. And then moving on from that, the longer term ambition will be that there'll be the opportunity for people to reinvest into future issuances, but that there'll also be the opportunities around our annual report, which we produce as a council, to include reference to the projects and to be able to again use that as a channel to promote the successes on that and to present to investors and the wider city the opportunities that have been available in this issuance in trying to encourage people to invest in a future issuance if that is the choice that's taken further down the line. I don't know if, Matt, there's anything you want to...
Not that question.
There was a question from Councillor Johnson as well about improving awareness in the comms campaign, and Councillor Argenzio. Hopefully, is that covered off the points there around actually what we're intending to do around that? I'll just briefly touch on the points raised by Councillor Smith around the low risk, and then hand over to Matt for if there's any more detail required around that. I think it's worth, I think, probably just first of all just emphasising that the wording that's related in the report itself is taken directly from the Abundance platform in terms of how risk is presented to investors. So within their online platform, they do very clearly state that this is a low risk investment, that it is an investment that people need to take in terms of understanding that it's a fixed term investment for a fixed period, and so therefore it's relatively illiquid. People can, if they wish to, try and take their investment out before that 5-year period is up. However, they're reliant on actually being able to sell that through the Abundance marketplace. So effectively, it's like a 5-year fixed term savings account, putting your money away for 5 years. And in terms of being able to be transparent, the Abundance platform sets out in terms of the details around what you are doing in terms of where you're investing your money. You're investing that into a local authority. I think an important thing also is just to emphasise that the investment is coming into the council rather than into individual projects. So it's obviously funding individual projects, but people are being repaid not necessarily on the success of that project delivering, but on the fact that the council's covenant and the council will repay that debt back to Abundance, and then the funding will then be repaid back to those investors. I think the other thing, just before I hand over to Matt, if there's some other points just to cover in terms of either that or the city exposure, is that with the organisation, with Abundance being FCA regulated, they do have a provision within their organisation in terms of having a backup organisation with step-in rights that would step in if Abundance were, and this was something that was actually evaluated in the initial proposal that came to the committee last December. And again, that was one of the issues that we addressed in looking at that due diligence question around Abundance having someone who would step in to that role to manage that and to effectively manage the wind down. And the council would then still, as we would expect, have to repay the funding which we'd have borrowed from the citizens of Sheffield and beyond, whoever's invested into the programme. Yeah. Anything you want to?
Yeah, so on the procurement side, so we spoke to internal colleagues around procurement, and due to the service they offer, there is no need to go through a procurement process to get to abundance. And in terms of reaching the targets and the goals, the platform is currently partnering with Esme Fairbrother and Unity Trust Bank, and they effectively have put up a pot which is going to either top us up or match our local investment. So because we're in one of the early tranches of the local climate bond being raised, there is enough in that pot to help top us up if required.
Thank you very much for comprehensively answering all of those questions. That's really, really helpful, and hopefully members feel that that's useful information that's answered those questions. So there will be more to come. We will hear more about the climate bonds as the launch plans progress. Just to add my thanks to the team for working at pace to get this to this point. It's really a big step forward. Recommendations are set out on page 139 that it's recommended that this committee agree to launch the local climate bond described in the report through the Abundance platform, that we approve the implementation of a green finance framework, which is in Appendix 3 of the report, and we agree to the issuance of up to 5 future local climate bonds up until the end of 2030, and those climate bonds would be subject to the parameters set out in recommendation 3. Are people happy to support those recommendations? Great, thank you very much indeed. Colleagues, that brings us to the conclusion of our meeting. Thank you all very much. Our next meeting is in December. See you all then.